Peters, and I'm proud to serve as the President and CEO of United Way Next. Today, we have a fabulous program planned with some very dynamic guest speakers, as well as a lot of United Way friends who are going to help with our breakout rooms and some of the logistics. I want to give a quick shout out to Caitlin Guest, who's in Wisconsin, and they're experiencing tornado warnings there. So we may have some shifts and adjustments along the way if needed, but we know you'll be patient with us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our host of today, our hostess, Mary E. Tyler.
Well, thank you so very much, Carol, and great afternoon, everyone. We're excited to have you join us, and I want to say thank you to Caitlin for all of the invaluable work and efforts you have put into helping make this a success. And thank you, Carol, for your leadership. On behalf of the DEIB work group, I want to extend a warm welcome to everyone, especially the first-time attendees. We have you here, and we are genuinely valued your presence and grateful that you are participating for this first roundtable of the year. If you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat and let us know your name, organization, and location. Just a quick shout out. Special thanks to the United Way board members led by Ed Rivera and the DEIB work group led by David Nicole. United Way board members and DEIB sub work group, could you just wave to everyone or do a virtual wave and say hello to our guests? Also, I want to express a profound bit of gratitude to the members of the DEIB programming subgroup who helped make today's program possible. We are thrilled and fortunate to have Darlene Slaughter and Charmaine Brown as our esteemed speakers for today. Both are intellectual powerhouses, and you will be delighted and thrilled to hear what they have to say. But we're excited to hear their insights, and you'll hear those in just a few minutes. But I'm pleased at this time to turn the program over to a friend, colleague, and a torchbearer for this work, Mr. Jeffrey R. Wilcox. And Jeffrey's going to walk you through some information about our commitment to this work.
Thank you, Mary. Can all of you hear me okay? Well, we are just so thrilled to have you with us on this journey. I've been asked to talk a little bit just about making a declaration about what brings us all here as a united family against some of the things that are happening in the world where diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness isn't being cultivated that brings out the best in all of us. And in that limelight, I'm proud to tell you that on September of 2023, thanks to the work of the work group that Mary was speaking about, the board of directors of United Way Next, and I need one more little thing here. Thank you for a little bit of grace as I get my production going. In September of 2023, the board of directors of United Way Next made a declaration of what I call intention. Now it's called our commitment, but it's a declaration of intent about our organization's stance and our desire to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness, not only in our association, but across the country. I'm not going to read this to you. I hope that you are reading it. What is important is I want to call out to you the verbs that you see. The verbs that you see on this screen is there is intentionality around embracing each other and embracing a concept. There is a valuing. We operate from a set of values. We also are a set of believers. We are believers about when we unleash the power of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness, anything is possible because we're doing it together. As an association and as community leaders, we have to ensure that these practices are taking place. It isn't going to just happen. And finally, we're making a pledge. And by asking you to be here today, we're hoping to fulfill that pledge. This is our intention. Now, let me tell you a little bit about United Way Next and the whole DEIB ideal. As we talk with each other today, there are really 3 series of activities that's occurring. And sometimes it's important to say, I wonder where he's coming from. I wonder where she's coming from. I wonder what they think when they are talking about DEIB. As an organization, our first and foremost is to give opportunities for every person who is a part of the United Way Next organization is to have a personal growth experience. Some of the questions and comments are going to come from our own personal struggles and our own personal journeys around these topics, because each of us as a person is having to go on this journey ourselves. But you know what? We also do it with each other, which is association excellence. Some people may be making comments about not only how do I help myself, but how do I help others who are a fellow member of our association. And then there's also they're coming from, how do we help local United Ways? How do we create community impact? So it's important as we get involved in this conversation, United Way Next represents a wonderful convergence of people who are growing, who are at a place and time in their own personal growth, in their community growth, and in their community impact. And then finally, I just want to shout out, oops, there it is. Mary has talked about the group. What we're going to do today is our group at United Way Next is to inspire United Way Next, our members and our partners to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in communities worldwide. And what we're asking you to do is to help us figure out what that advancement looks like. Thanks everybody for being here. We're making a declarative intent to listen and to make change in solidarity. Mary, back to you.
Thank you so very much, Jeffrey. We are so thrilled to be able to announce this, not only on the website, but to also have this information shared with you personally. Now it is my pleasure to present our speakers for today. I'm pleased to present Darlene R. Slaughter, known as a visionary with a passion for removing barriers and providing equal opportunities for all. She is the first, let me say that again, she is the first appointed Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, which has over 13,000 employees. Darlene was the Chief Diversity Officer for March of Dimes and the former United Way Worldwide. And then also, you need to know this, that when Bill Mills, who is also a United Way retiree from Worldwide, suggested Darlene as a possible presenter, I found her on LinkedIn and contacted her. She responded and we met on Zoom. After sharing information about this roundtable, she didn't hesitate. She said yes. Next, I'd like to say that Darlene will be joined by Charmaine Brown, who took on the role of the Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at United Way Worldwide last year. Charmaine is an enthusiastic bridge builder and barrier breaker and has held various leadership roles in diversity, equity, and inclusion at Finance of America Companies, Charles County Government, and the Mortgage Bankers Association. She and Darlene have worked together at Fannie Mae. A few months ago, I left a voicemail for Charmaine to introduce myself and welcome her to United Way. She quickly returned my call and we had a delightful conversation. It was actually Darlene who suggested that she and Charmaine co-present today. Ladies, thank you both for your generosity and for accepting our invitation. And we turn the program over to you.
Thank you for that. And let me just say before Charmaine starts, this is the past and the present coming together to get you guys to the future. Okay.
Let's go. Mary, thank you. Carol, thank you. Jeffrey, that was very inspiring already. I love the statement of intent. And Darlene and I are looking forward to engaging all of you. Thank you for the opportunity to help kick off your DEIB for 2024. So we are going to jump right into the conversation. If we could advance to the first slide. And we'll just review what we're going to go over today. So as Mary said, I am now the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at United Way Worldwide. And since joining United Way Worldwide in 2023, I've been really doing a lot of listening and learning and engaging with our local United Ways. And under the leadership of Christopher Jackson, who is our CHRO, and Angela Williams, who you all know is our CEO, we have created a DEI strategic plan that will move the commitment that Angela made forward. And what you're looking at on this slide are the 6 principles that will guide the work within the United Way organization and extend to our local United Ways. So I want to quickly just go over these principles. The first one is that we are going to model equitable and inclusive behaviors. So as Jeffrey just articulated, this powerful statement of intent, but what makes intent even more powerful and what makes commitments more powerful is actually putting things into action. So what does inclusive behavior actually look like? The second one is to implement evidence-based and data-driven strategies and initiatives. So everything that we plan to do, to the extent possible, is grounded in the data. It's what does the data tell us that we need to do. And so anecdotes are great. We pay attention to those things, but to the extent possible, we look at what is quantifiable and then we act upon that. The third one, and I'm leaning in because I can barely see, is to prioritize our people and our culture. And I think going back to what Darlene said earlier, everything happens based on the people. We don't have a winning strategy if we don't pay attention to our people. And so our people are our priority. And as you see here, our culture as well. Culture, as you all have probably heard, eat strategy for breakfast. That is one of those quotes that I think is so relevant to our conversation today. And so we want to pay attention to the culture at United Way Worldwide and make sure that we are creating one that is inclusive, accepting, and authentically inclusive and accepting, and also a place where people truly experience a sense of belongingness. Embrace diversity in all of its dimensions. And that is very similar to what Jeffrey said in terms of taking the broadest view possible on diversity. Sometimes we get really focused on the visible dimensions of diversity, right? And that are the things that we see and the things that we perceive based on what we see. And we can get stuck. We know that the visible dimensions of diversity is where solidarity is formed, assumptions are made, and sometimes value is assigned. And so we want to make sure that when we say diversity, we're talking about everyone, not some, but all. Maintain agility and be future focused. You all have probably heard about Angela's transformational vision for the organization, and we are focused very much on the future, right? What are the trends that are going to be really important to pay attention to make sure that we are moving in the right direction and that we are responding to those trends appropriately? And maintaining agility. Embed DE&I in everything that we do. It is the way that we operate. And so what do our policies look like? And that's the work that I'm undertaking, doing those policy audits and making sure that our policies and procedures align with our DEI commitment and our vision. And so this is just to help bring you up to speed on kind of what's happening with the DEI plan at UWW. And I will also say, in addition to Chris Jackson being our leader in the DEI space, I am also honored to have Sheila Oche on my team, who is our DEI manager. And so, Caitlin, we can advance to the next slide. And so here are just some of the highlights as to the DEI strategic plan and what we're working on. So we have actually undergone our own workforce demographic analysis inside of the organization. So we have looked at all of those dimensions of diversity in the organization and where the individuals sit within the organization. So what does our leadership level look like? What does middle management look like? So on and so forth. So now we have a baseline and we're able to create more targeted approaches to recruitment to fill the gaps where we have them. We are in the process of standing up 3 employee resource groups. And as I understand it, this will be the first time in the organization's history where we actually have ERGs. And so we have 3 that are currently underway. The first is women's, the next is caregiver, and then we also have a Hispanic ERG. All of the ERGs have executive sponsors that come from the ELT ranks. So Angela's direct reports have stepped up to say that they will sponsor these ERGs. Cultural observances. Since coming on board, we have been coming together on various different important cultural observances. We've done Pride Month and Black History Month and Hispanic Heritage Month, and so on and so forth. And employees are really leaning in, and there's lots of energy and enthusiasm for the work that we're doing. And we're now in the process of telling our DEI story and refreshing our DEI brand. Angela created a very compelling message about the organization's commitment to DEI, and that is now on our newly refreshed DEI page. DEI Professionals Network in the local United Ways. We did a convening last July, bringing them in to United Way Worldwide in Alexandria and having robust conversations and some training to help support their growth and recognize at the local level that they also are experiencing a lot of the things that DEI professionals across the board are experiencing. We're also this year creating a DEI playbook for the local United Ways who are doing this work. And so the playbook is, you know, the DEI Bible from soup to nuts, wherever you're starting on the continuum, whatever your maturity level in DEI, you can reference this playbook and help to build out your strategic plan, initiatives, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that I'm super excited to talk to you about is the very first launch of the Academy for Multicultural Leadership Development and Advancement, or what we're calling AMILDA. AMILDA will launch this July. Day 1 of AMILDA is all about you. So we're going to put together an agenda that will focus on what the professionals need in terms of their own personal growth, including supporting their wellness. This work can be very challenging at times. And so day 1, all about you. Day 2, all about your impact. And so that's going to be where we come together to talk about best and promising practices, bring in speakers, and offer up some tools and resources that will help support the local United Ways doing this work. So we're super excited about launching AMILDA. We have a planning and design team that's comprised of the local United Ways as well as staff from United Way Worldwide. So a lot of real excitement around the launch of AMILDA in July. And Caitlin, we can go to the next slide. And this is just when I talked about our DEI brand story. Here are some of the photos from the convening last year and Pride Month. And then I had the honor of facilitating a DEI conversation with the United Way in Southeast Louisiana. There you see Michael Williamson. And then the other photo that I really want to call out here is we had with the Central Florida United Way, Jeffrey Hayward. We had a wonderful screening of a documentary called Know Your Place about segregation in Florida. It was extremely well attended. And in fact, I think the highest level of attendance of all of our events. And we had a wonderful conversation about that time period and how much progress we've made since then, although we still have a ways to go. And then Matt Marshall invited me out to the Tennesseans for Historical Justice conversation on lynchings and the horrible, horrible history of lynchings in Tennessee. So we are sharing our story on our new website, and there's lots more to come when we continue to do the work and then build out the website with pictures and even the ERGs. And we can go to the next slide, please. And the local United Ways are doing incredible work. And so I reached out to a few of them after we had a call with Mary and Carol, and they were very excited about the opportunity for me to highlight some of the great work that's taking place there. And so United Way Central Maryland, Baltimore, Wayne Yoon, the DEI leader there, is conducting a baseline equity audit to identify areas of improvement for advancing DEI in that office. She's also hosting board equity chats and training with the board of directors. I won't read all of these to you, but I do think it's important to point out that last bullet and the incredible work that Wayne and that leadership team is doing to increase diversity at the board level and engage the community. And as you can see here, they are currently represented with over 40% diversity. And again, with individuals coming from the community. So a lot of great work happening in Central Maryland. Next slide, please. And then United Way South Central Michigan with Jen Sue Bishop, who's the DEI leader there. Now this slide is pretty dense. So I think what Jen Sue Bishop is doing is incredible, connecting Alice and Alice data to the workforce at United Way in South Central Michigan. So I know you all know what Alice stands for, but we don't use acronyms without saying it. So it's asset limited, income constrained, employed. And so Jen Sue Bishop has actually looked at their population to see how they align inside of the organization to the Alice population, and also did a pay equity study and has closed the pay equity gap. And that is when you talk about making change and aligning words with action, I think it is incredible that Jen Sue and the leadership team there has done this work. And let's go to the next slide, please. And then finally, United Way Greater Twin Cities, where Sherry Sanchez Tibbetts is the DEI leader, and they're now conducting an employee engagement survey. And I think this is the first survey that they've conducted since Sherry came on board. They now have a DEI strategic action plan that's being implemented. They're building the capacity of their ERGs. And something that they're doing that is incredible in terms of moving the ERG concept forward is they're now contemplating compensation for the ERGs. And that has long been something that's talked about when it comes to ERGs, because they're spending so much time on top of their day jobs supporting the DEI work. And so in the Twin Cities, Sherry is now doing a study to see how the ERGs can be compensated for that discretionary effort, which is, game change. And then in collaboration with 3M, they're developing a multimedia DEI resource for their corporate volunteers. So that's just a little bit about what's happening at the local level. And I don't know about you, but I am super impressed with what the local United Way leaders are doing in the DEI space. And we can go to the next slide. All right, so this is where we shift. Thank you for that. I was just wanting very much to sort of catch you up on what's happening at United Way Worldwide. And so now we're actually going to go into the conversation. And I hope you all are ready, because we're going to dig in and give you an opportunity to get your voice in the room. So with that, I'm going to invite Darlene to help us kick this off. Thank you all.
So thank you, Charmaine. That was great update. So before I start, I'm going to show, I don't know if you can see this. See this? See this? I keep this slide, I keep this momentum to remind myself and to remind those that are having these kind of conversations to just breathe. Because a lot of times we don't. A lot of times we get very anxious about it. A lot of times when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, we don't know what to say. We don't want to say the wrong thing, or we have our belief systems that are on one side or the other. But really, it's take a deep breath, and we're not going to break. No one is going to break. And so we really want to be present in this moment. And the conversation around breaking news is what's happening in the world that you're paying attention to around this diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. You can put it in the chat or you can speak up. I always like it when people actually talk, because sometimes it's just nice to see and hear voices and faces, but you can also put it in the chat. So one of the things that I know is depending on where you live in the world will depend on what the local news is, right? We all see the national things that are happening, but in the local jurisdictions, in your local United Ways, something may be happening for you that might not be happening for me. And I've been a diversity officer now since 2008. That is when I first became a chief diversity officer in 2008. And so I've seen a lot. I've been around for a long time, and diversity actually, and I'll just make it short and say diversity has its highs and lows, right? There are times when it's front and center. It's times when it kind of goes low key. You don't hear much about it. Then it pops back up. And right now we have popped back up. So the ebbs and the flows, right? So we are at the peak of interest around diversity, not necessarily positive. So there have been times when it's been very positive and there's times when it's not positive. And so because of all of the angst that's out there, we wanted just to say what's relevant for you, what's top of mind for you. So I see conflict in Haiti and how it's affecting Haitians in our country. Yeah, and a lot of things that are impacting people are absolutely impacting people across the world, but it also impacts a lot of Black and brown people across the world and people of color, and we don't want to lose sight of that. So we have the conflict in Haiti. O.J. Simpson passed today, and that, lots of varying reactions to that. I'm sure I have not looked at the news or looked at the social media to see what folks are saying, but I'm sure there's some polarization around that as well, as he was a polarizing person. What else is going on for you in some of the headlines that you're seeing and things that are of challenge?
Women's health issues.
Yes, that's a big one, right? That's a big one. The anti-LGBTQ policies that are happening, just Alabama's Alabama. Right? So thanks, Neil, for that. Right? Some of the laws that are being passed, some of the bills that are being passed. And so let me tell you just a little bit. I work in an organization where we have a gentleman who started work in 1965. He is still working every day. And I think about what happened in 1964, 1965, we were signing on to the Voting Rights Act, right? And today we are kind of trying to dismantle a lot of that. So the same thing with this diversity space, it comes and it goes, front and center, front page, and it'll go low key for a while, and something will happen in the world where it's important. But when we talk about communities, how do we keep moving forward? And that's what we want to talk to you today about. So we have the anti-DEI legislation in Alabama. We have the inability to manage diversity of thought. It's tearing apart relationships in organizations and communities. Everyone is becoming politically correct in terms of, I don't want to say anything. And so we are neutralizing the conversation as though it doesn't exist. And if we cannot talk about gender, and we cannot talk about race, and we cannot talk about sexuality, and we cannot talk about religion, and we cannot talk about all of these things, and we're all just fine, and we're all just the same, and we're all working on the same goals to get to the same place. And that is absolutely not true. Because we don't talk about it doesn't mean that it's working or not working, right? So we have to be courageous and bold to continue the conversations. And I'll tell you, and this is what I say, and I'm gonna just keep it 100 real for you. And I say to folks, look, here's how this works. If white folks aren't involved in this, it's just not going to happen. So we need everybody to be involved in it. We need all of the courageous conversations. We need all of the perspectives to be at the table. This is not about us and them, but it is about equity. How do we look at equity, and how do we work for the communities in which we're living, and we work in, to bring up everyone in that community? Because as we can bring up the least of us, it is significant for all of us, and it supports all of us. So the rise of anti-Jewish sentiment, vandalism, and threats, right? It's getting worse, right? So we are in a society right now, the dismantling of the Ohio Department of Education. We are in a society right now that is probably at one point in time at its lowest point in time around where we are. And sometimes we can look at it one or two ways. It's at its lowest point of where we are, but it may be, are things breaking apart so that we can build them back together in a very different way? And I think this is where United Ways are so important, because you are in the hearts of all of these communities. You are on the ground helping these communities to have these kind of conversations, to take a step back and to say, who's missing at the table? Whose thought is not there? When we think of diversity of thought, who are we leaving out as we are making commitments in the side of the community? And so that's what we're here today, to really get you to start thinking about the opportunities and the things that you can do differently, not only as an individual, but also as an organization. So we could go to the next.
Hey, Darlene, before we have this conversation, I wanted to go back to Jeffrey's comment, because I think there's a little bit more to dig into there. Jeffrey, can you just tell us your comment again? You talked about relationships and tearing us apart, from what I remember.
Yeah, my comment, actually, Darlene said it extremely well, which is, because we are not brave in managing the diversity of thought that exists, our inability is hurting us in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we're avoiding conversations we should be having. But because we're not having those conversations, we are just tearing apart the fabric of what built those relationships, their families. We've seen organizations that are absolutely becoming paralyzed, and communities that are becoming polarized that once were a community.
So the reason why I wanted to kind of come back to that is, I think some of it has to do with courage, and I want to offer this out to the group and get some of your responses. Some of it has to do with courage, for sure, and avoidance. You know, various cultures are conflict avoidance. But what about how confident are you that you actually have the language and the tools? In other words, we may have some people who want to have the conversation, but do they know how to have the conversation? So they're not unwilling to have the conversation, but fear, perhaps, saying the wrong thing. And so maybe with those folks, we may need just to equip them and give them some guidance on how to engage. It's not as though we've been having these conversations for all that long. So I would love to hear from some of the folks in the chat, or come off of mute. Let's hear your voice. And what do you think? Is it more fear? Is it just maybe not knowing how to engage around these topics? What are you thinking?
Fear of losing donors.
I
mean,
Corey.
Fear of losing, point blank, depending on where a corporation politically is aligning. When a CEO says, I don't want to hear you use that word equity again. Right?
Thank you, Corey. So fear.
I'm Deb, but I'm under Corey's name.
Oh, what's your name?
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm Deb Dingus, sorry.
Oh, Deb, sorry, I
should have
saw
introduced
Corey.
myself.
But no, that's real, right? Fear of
Right.
losing donors.
Right.
Anyone else? What's keeping you perhaps from engaging in the conversation? All right, then we can move on.
No, this is when I
Thank you,
hold
Deb.
my sign, right?
Yeah, we're gonna keep holding that up, Darlene. We're gonna keep holding that up. We got some more to jump into here.
Right, just breathe, right? Just breathe. So
Yeah,
I would let me say, oh, I see Diane's hand is raised. Go
oh,
ahead.
good. All right, Diana, let's
Yeah,
hear
and
from you.
I'm going to take a stab at this. When I think about the great skills that I learned in the United Way movement, collaboration, consensus, bringing people along, trying to have a conversation around DEIB seems so hard to try to build consensus because people are in such different spaces. So if we've got this culture that embraces consensus and DEI sometimes seems like a lightning rod, how can those two things live in the same universe?
That's a really good point. And so I want to offer up a question about that. And I think it goes back to the broadest view of diversity possible. When we say the word diversity, what do you think of? Diane, anybody? What do you think of? Why is it a lightning rod? And then equity, going back to, I think, Deb's point, like donors not wanting to hear you say that word again. Even the very words are carrying strong emotion that's driving some of this tension. So what do you think about when you hear the word diversity? And please, anybody.
Most people think of race.
Okay, are you Ramon?
I am Ramond.
Okay, Ramon.
And going back to the previous question, if I may,
Please.
I think when you have entire communities that don't embrace diversity, those boards that we work in United Ways are just microcosms of the communities. And you can't have consensus in a boardroom when you don't have it in a community. And the smaller the community, the more difficult it is to have that discussion, because the discussions that they're having in the country clubs, in the bank boardrooms, aren't consistent with what you're trying to do or hope to do in the boardrooms, even of your United Ways. So there's definite conflict in what your teams and your your community would like to see happen, and what the board would like to see happen in many cases. That has been my experience.
Thank
Can I
you.
jump-
Thank you, Ramon.
Can I jump in on what Ramon just said just for a minute?
Sure.
So Ramon, you talk about, and the person before about consensus. Even consensus as a value or a process is no longer valued in our community. Consensus meaning that we each take a moment to breathe, reflect, and we don't make a decision until we come to a consensus. That is a way of being. Even the theory of the common good is not viewed in a positive lens. So it's like our whole bedrock of what we value, even somewhat below diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, is at stake right now.
Yeah, no, I think those are all really good points. And I'm going to let Darlene get to this slide.
Yeah.
But I do think that everyone's points are well taken. But the perception of what diversity is and isn't, I think there's some work to do there. Are you familiar? And I think going back to what Darlene said, this isn't going to work if white folks aren't involved. this isn't going to work if all of us aren't involved.
Right.
And so, have you heard the term status quo threat? If you have, and you could just come off of mute and speak to what you think the role of status quo threat is in this conversation. If you have heard the term, which basically, because we do have a few more slides, but I think it's relevant to the conversation and supports everyone's point. And that is, there's a norm today. There's a status quo that some people may fear. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is not for the good of the whole. And it's a zero-sum game. And if we're going to have everybody as part of the conversation to the greatest extent possible, then we really do have to recognize the people who are not on board, where they are getting stuck, and what we can do to the extent possible to help bring them along and to not leave them behind in the conversation. So I'm going to stop there because I know we've got some more to talk about. But thank you all for engaging and coming off of mute.
Yeah. So let me just say, and I know we're going to put you into chat room so that you can have a little bit deeper conversation. So when we think about this slide, it was really, where are you about this? Does it feel like a wrecking ball, or does it feel like a pendulum where it's the back and forth, right? And in some places it is a wrecking ball. I think when we talk about consensus building, that we also need to begin to change that language and say, we are trying to find common ground, right? So consensus, we know everybody is not going to agree with everything. We have people who have their values, their belief systems, but there at some point, what we have to do, and there was a slide that you showed a little bit, that Jeffrey showed with the 3 circles where the interlocking circles were. What is the common ground? Where is our community, and how do we find that sweet spot where everybody can say, that makes sense, that makes sense. It doesn't matter where you are, what position you're taking, what community, what neighborhood you live in. But if you're in this area, there are some things that are a common ground for us. And so as we start to get polarized and we start to even minimize the conversation around consensus where that doesn't look like it's a value, finding common ground is the value that you want to find from just, we're human, right? And so while we are all diverse, all of us are diverse, we have different diverse ideas and backgrounds and perspectives, we are more alike than we're not. And so the conversation that we sometimes are afraid of are the conversations around common ground and diversity, but it's also around power and privilege. And who has power, who has privilege, and how do they get used for the good of the community? And that's where you start to reframe how we're thinking about that. And I think this, for everyone on this call, that's how you can start reframing the language and to help move those conversations with the boards, right? So again, who's not at the table when you're talking about boards? Who's not at the table when you're talking about, there was a conversation that I had when I was at United Way, and it was a really interesting, and I won't need to go into it, but the conversation was, we are afraid of losing donors because of a political, because of a dynamic that was happening at the time. And the conversation was, but who are the donors that are not joining you because they don't see themselves in what you're doing? So you may lose a $50,000 donor, that is true, but you may gain 100 people who can give you $10,000 a piece, and you're going to get way more than you got from that $50,000 donor, right? So I think that's how we need to start thinking about this. Who stands behind me? You don't have any idea. So if you don't engage a conversation with me because you look at me as a recipient of the services that United Way provides, but not necessarily as the donor or a board member who can put dollars on the table, what you don't know is who stands behind me, who will give dollars because I am on your board, and because you are having conversations with me. So I'm gonna just let you take that in. And then we're going to go to the next slide because I know we don't have a lot of time. But we want to give you a chance to go into breakout rooms. And here are the questions that we want you to think about in there. How are you impacted by what's in the news? And you can get, really how is it impacting you? You don't have to go through the list of all of these things that we talked about earlier. But what are some of your biggest challenges with your board, with your community, with yourself? And then think about what you personally can do to hold yourself accountable, because a lot of times in these conversations, we do think about the other. It's not me. I don't feel that way. It's about all these other people that I have to work with, right? So where is it that what are the blind spots that you have? What are the biases that you have? Because we all have biases, right? So we have to sort of check ourselves around that. And then at the end of this is, what is one outcome you would like to see for your space and for what you're trying to do and how you're helping your United Way and your community? So we're going to put you in the chat. Each of the chat rooms will have facilitators. And we want it to be a robust conversation. And Charmaine and I will pop in and out of the different chat rooms just to make sure everybody's doing okay. And then when we come back, we're going to give a few of the groups a chance to talk about what you heard.
Thank you, everyone, for participating in that small group discussion. And we would like to hear from just a couple groups. Carol, who from your group would be willing to share information, just the highlights in 1 or 2 minutes?
Okay, I'm going to call on Chris.
Chris, where are you from?
I'm from Pueblo, Colorado.
Fantastic. Thank you. Go ahead. It's on you.
Thank you. We had a lot of focus on local news and how that affects us in our group. We had some great conversation about that actually, and we all kind of had the same viewpoint. And we had to disconnect, from a lot of news that we can't really attribute to in our communities, and really focus on what we can do and the issues that focus on our communities, and how we can utilize the resources within United Way and within our own selves to serve our community, and not let all of that kind of come down on us as community advocates. And we were able to start a conversation about kind of what diversity means to us, and we were in the infancy about that conversation. And then we came back to larger group here, but overall we had some really great conversations, and a unique element. We have Christina from who's in Germany, so we've got an international perspective as well. So that was fantastic. So appreciate that.
And Miss Carol was the best facilitator, just so you know.
Thank you, Jason. But I do want to make one quick comment about the young lady we had who works for UWW in Germany. And her concern, I think, her challenge was being connected to the network. She sort of feels, because she's not a part of the US network, that she's not getting the same support that she would like to get. And Charmaine, I want you to know that. So
Thank you.
okay.
Duly noted.
All right.
Very good. Who's up next?
All right, Roger. Thank you, Carol, to your group. Roger, who from your group would like to share 1 or 2 minutes highlights? You're on mute, Roger.
Cindy, would you talk to us about your efforts to make diversity more than race?
Beautiful.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, we have actually done some work in DEI the last year or so, actually won an award for some of the work that we did in our community. And we had last November a large community just kind of like a lunch and learn series from our local Procter & Gamble plant, we had some of their experts in DCI come and talk to us about how DCI is so much more than race. A lot of times people think that's all we're talking about when we say, you know, diversity and inclusion and equity. They think it's just race, but it is so much more. And we talked about aging and disability and LGBTQ and talked about all the things that even from people mispronouncing names because they don't want to learn how to pronounce the name as it was originally given to that person. And, you know, I had a gentleman say to me, I never thought about that name was specific to that person, given to that person. And because I can't say it, instead of learning how to say it, I just shortened it. And, you know, that can be very, you know, just not debilitating, but just be, you know, very uncomfortable for some people. So that was a really great thing that we learned, just, you know, thinking outside the box a little bit, just as simple as learn how to say somebody's name.
Great. Thank you, Cindy. Cindy, what community are you?
I'm located in South Georgia and Albany, Georgia. I'm with United Way of Southwest Georgia.
Okay, fantastic. And thank you and congratulations on that recognition. Roger, anything else from your group?
You know, a variety of, I guess I would say, my listening of community kind of issues for which the DEI element is sometimes embedded, just like it is in homelessness or current challenges for education institutions. It's clearly embedded in those kinds of local issues.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Sorry we can't hear from others, but those were fantastic highlights from your discussion. And I was really excited to see your comments when Charmaine and Darlene I'm trying to make them to one word. I'm sorry. Charmaine and Darlene asked the question, what's in the news? And some of those comments that you added were right on point and some that I hadn't even thought about. So thank you so very much for that. We're going to do a couple of things. We want to have Darlene and Charmaine wrap up with some resources and what's next as a result of all this. But we want to give you just a moment or two. If you've got a question that you want to pose to Darlene and Charmaine, let's do that now and just raise your hand or just jump in there if you have something that's pressing on your heart or mind that you want to ask them. Because we've got two profound experts here now.
Hi, it's the end of the day, so I couldn't find my raise hand feature. My name is Joy Roscoe, pronouns she, her. I'm the senior DEI manager for United Way for Greater Austin. And I wanted to know, is there a formalized DEI framework that is adopted United Way across the board?
I'll take that. Joy, you said?
Yes.
Joy, thank you for that question. We have our membership certification requirement. We don't have a DEI specific framework, but in the membership certification requirement, in fact, going back to Cindy's point, we actually broaden the definition of diversity in the new requirements. And so we now are recognizing other very important dimensions of diversity as Cindy referred to. We have our Thriving United Way framework. The Thriving United Way framework does have IDEA, inclusion, diversity, engagement, and access also embedded throughout. But having had this conversation, Joy, I had mentioned earlier on that we were working on this DEI playbook. And so I think the playbook will have a framework that can be adopted specific to DEI for the organization, all of the local United Ways, as well as this group. And so this has been a really insightful conversation. And I have a few things that I'm now going to take back and think a little differently about the plan that I had mentioned earlier. So thank you.
Is there one more? One more question someone has that's pressing they'd like to ask Charmaine or Darlene? All right.
Like
Abby,
Abby
yes.
has her hand raised.
Yeah.
Someone's hands up. Go ahead and speak. Start speaking.
One of the things that I think about is how do we continue to institutionalize this kind of work and the gains that we've had as leaders who are committed to it, so that it goes beyond our service within the organization. Kind of just thoughts on that.
Mhm.
So I would say, it's, you have to talk about it. Leaders have to talk about it. It has to be, on the agenda, right? Board meetings have to have it on the agenda, and people have to actually see it, right? It's one thing to say, we believe in this and we think this is important, but you never see any markers in the organization around it. So putting it on the agenda, making it a topic, and not put it on the agenda at the end of the meeting, but put it on the agenda in the beginning of the meeting, because we all know when we get to the end of the meeting, everybody's ready to go, and it's like, well, we'll do this next time, right? And next time never comes. So I think that's one of the ways that you institutionalize it. But again, it's also to the point, and I think it was Joy, but it wasn't Joy, but I think it was Carol. I can't see all the names, but I think one of the things is it is bigger than race, right? So it is about people with disabilities. It is about ageism. And when we talk about ageism, those who are in their 20s versus those who are in their 60s who are still in the workplace. It is about language and religion. It is about those who are native born in America and those who are immigrating to America, and those who have accents, those who know how to speak different languages. So those are the kinds of things that really make this come true for people, and you have to be consistent with it. The thing about the diversity space is it's not a marathon. It's like an ultra marathon where you just keep going and you keep going and you keep going. You keep going and you keep going. And one year you're going to be front and center and things are going to be really good. Something's going to happen and you're going to get pushed back a little bit. But it doesn't mean that you don't keep going. And that's the thing that you have to really focus on. And then how can you measure some of those things? I mean, sometimes you measure the simplest things of how many leaders are actually showing up for programs that you're putting on, right? That's a measurement, because if the leadership is not showing up and the leadership is saying it's important, but they don't make the time to show up in the room, then what people see is it's not really important. It's just lip service, right? So those are the kinds of things that I think you need to do to begin to institutionalize the diversity in your space, in your community, on your boards, and really having these critical conversations with board members is critical, right? Because they set the direction for the local United Ways. So if we can only get out of, it's not about we're trying to lose donors, we're actually trying to be more inclusive, right? So how do you have the conversation? How can we be more inclusive and add to what we already have? So this is not about replacing board members with other people. It's adding to the board so that the board is much more inclusive and that everybody across that community can see themselves as a part of that board and a part of the initiatives that are happening within the local United Ways. So.
Thank you both. I think it was Joy and Abby who posed those questions. Great questions. We have a poll that we want to put it up now to just ask you to give us feedback on any particular topic that you think we should explore in the future. It may be this year, it could be the following year. So if you would take that poll, and then we're going to put up the slides so that Darlene can share some resources with you. And if you give us just 2 more minutes, we can get that completed.
We also would welcome you to put in the chat a specific topic that you think would be beneficial to hear about. if there's a subject matter or topic that would really resonate with you, we'll be gathering all this feedback for our future sessions. So thank you.
Or if you know of a speaker or presenter that you think would be a great resource for this group and community, that would be helpful as well. All right, can we put up the slides and then we'll transition to wrap it up?
So okay, so let me just say this, and this is a part of, and what I'll do is I'll send some resources to Mary and to Carol that can then be shared with you, so we won't necessarily have it. But I love this slide because, and I know in America, and it's not at the global level, but in America, when we do talk about diversity, that is what's top of mind for people, because that's kind of how we were built, right? How this community was built. But what's interesting is when you look at this slide from Pew Research, look at who socializes with people. So the majority of US adults say most of their close friends share their race or ethnicity. So for all adults, 63% of all adults are not talking to people outside of their communities, right? And it is usually at work where most of that diversity is coming to you, not necessarily in your communities. So when you look at it from a racial standpoint, you know, everyone is sort of very, very into who they feel like they belong to. And that is because we feel safe. We look for similarities. We know how to move. We know how to talk within our own communities. And that has us many times talking about other communities in more of a negative way because it's more fearful. So one of the things we talked about earlier is we all have bias. We all have bias. And the bias actually is keeping us from having those conversations. But when you drop down to the bottom and you look at the ages of those who are in the 50 to 65 are more likely not to have friends outside of their groups. And those who are 18 to 29 are more likely to have friends outside their groups, right? And especially the 18 to 29 is a much more global group of people and younger group of people with different perspectives. So when you think about what you can do differently, it's like get to know somebody that you don't know, go places that you haven't been, watch movies that you would never think you would watch before, eat in restaurants where you're like, I don't know what that food tastes like, but I'm not interested. All of us have walked past the restaurant and we haven't even had an inkling of wanting to go inside it to try it, right? So these are the kinds of things that you could do to immerse yourselves in what it feels to be in someone else's shoes. And the more you do that, the bolder and more courageous you're going to get about the conversations around diversity and around all of the spectrums of diversity. So again, start paying attention to who's not in the conversation, who's not sitting at the table, who's not on the board meeting, who's not in the local United Way. And that way, that's going to take you to become much more stronger in where you stand, but also stronger in the work that you're doing. So I'll stop there. It's up there. I know we're a little bit over. Am I supposed to share these results from the DEI? Let me just do that. I don't know if I can. It's showing up on my screen. Did you see that?
It's gone now.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you. Thank you, Darlene. Thank you, Charmaine. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this conversation today. We greatly appreciate your presence, and we hope there was something that you were able to take away from this conversation and use not only in your life, but will impact someone else. Thank you also for staying a little bit over the 15-minute mark. 4:15 we had asked for, but have a fantastic day, everyone, and best wishes to you on your DE&I journey as you go forward. We have more information to share with you and look for that information as we keep it posted online.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks, Mary, for hosting, and Charmaine and Darlene for speaking today.
Thank you.